Still trying to get the spinner fit here. Now this is some of that sticky back sandpaper. And it kind of grinds the spinner fit right in. And what I did, I just doubled up the sandpaper so we can get 2 layers. That's a pretty good start on a spinner fit. Pretty reasonable. And one of the problems with most of these kind of cowlings is they flex in here. If you can see what I'm doing now. I'm going to run some little hardwood strips in there before. Obviously you got to do this before you final sand in the cowl. I'm just trimming this off. I'm going to get some little thin strips in there. Try to prevent that from happening. The motor's already in there too. Now with those little pieces installed, this can't go in so easy. I can kind of trim up the cowl fit. Block sand it in a little bit better than it was. We're going to have to cut out the rest of the holes in here. Okay, we cut the hole so we could choke the motor. Put hot stuff around the edge and kind of feather the hot stuff in. And one by one we're just going to go right down the road and check all these cowling openings. I'm doing the same thing with the needle valve hole. I'm putting a little piece of copper tubing in there. Protect it from taking too much of a beating. I've also made a little lip out of 64th plywood here to keep this from getting chewed up when you go to choke the motor. Right here you can see the little pieces of wood that I made so the cowling can't squeeze. I put a little piece back there also. I cut out my exhaust hole. Now I'm going to try to make a little liner out of metal here in case we want to run this without a muffler, and I think we're pretty much going to run this without a muffler. But I made the hole big enough that a Fox muffler will fit on there. I'm going to make a little liner for that. In the same way I have this hole lined, and I ran a piece of carbon fiber across this thin bridge. I'm probably going to run some carbon fiber up the sides here too. I took my little hand vise and I made up a little, looks like a picture frame I guess, out of tin. What I'm going to try to do is carefully fit this inside cowling outline. It'll act the same way this copper tubing does. I see I got to do a little trimming here. That's going to be the next step. Let's trim that right in. Now the only piece left to work on, we got to make the air exhaust in the back. We got the hole for the plug. Still looking for the air exhaust in the back, and then we'll dap the whole thing out, let it dry overnight, and work on it in the morning. Now I'm just punching in these air outlet holes. I want to avoid the mount, cowling mount, so it doesn't weaken it too much. And that's about what the mount holes are going to look like. I'll make up a little sandpaper dowel. That's going to be too big. Okay, all we got to do now is round them out. This is a good technique for whenever you want to punch holes in something. Sharpen up a piece of brass tubing. Nothing too fancy here, we just want to get some nice tapered holes in here. We won't have any brass on this. One of the things you could do if you wanted to fancy this up would be to take arrow shafts and shove them in here. That'd probably make it a little bit stronger too. Now we finished that all hollowing out. Now it's just going to be ready to dap up the little ging. Okay, at this step, we've got a coat of silver on the body. We tissued it, silk spanned the entire airplane, the entire body, of course. And we did the redundant finish that we did on the wing. I didn't think it would be efficient tape-wise to just go over the steps we did on the wing and the stab. Basically, a couple of coats of clear, silk span applied wet, 3 more coats of clear, a little bit of sanding sealer on the wood but not on the tissue, and a couple of coats of silver. Now we can see all the rough spots right now. This silver really looks terrible. We really got to get busy starting to sand this out. This is the first coat of silver, so we can go crazy now. We'll sand all the silver on this body off, and then we'll be pretty much ready to start nitpicking and looking for little flaws and looking for little things that we don't like. The cowling is the same way, it's in silver. Tip weight boxes down there. So we're going to have to start really getting fussy with this now. The next step, of course, we're going to let this silver dry for 2 days over the weekend. Have people coming over the house this weekend anyway to build an airplane, so. Now I've done several touch-ups on this. You can see with the spots of DAP, all the little bad spots, little nicks. Starting to really get fussy with that. Also on the cowling too. Try to finish off the inside of the cowling relatively smooth so that the gas won't get into all the nooks and crannies. Left a big enough hole on the side of the exhaust that if I want to move the motor forward, back, up, down, any kind of little adjustments I can make. Also with the needle valve hole. This is really the second coat of silver now that's been sprayed on the plane. I'm going to wait 2 days now before I sand this out. Sanding this silver out before it really dries out for a day or two, minimum of 1 day, 2 days even better. If you let it dry a week, it comes off like butter. Now from this point on, we're only going to be using 320 and 400 paper. We got the first real coat of silver dried out about 2 days. I think I did this Friday. This is Monday. So we can kind of dust off this silver now. And as you're doing it, you can be real fussy. Every little bad spot you see, you can go back with a little bit of DAP, a little bit of filler. If you can see the body, I'll try to focus in on it later. You can still see brush marks on the body because That's really got not really enough dope on it yet. It has little dry areas. You'll see dry patches. Again, I try to do most of the flat spots with a block. Obviously the round spots up here, you can see where I've touched up little dings. In here with a dowel. Other spot, this is the tip weight box. Always round the edges. Every time you put a coat of paint on, round the edges a little bit. This way you won't get a sharp razor edge where the paint will start to peel, or where you'll buff through the minute you start buffing this out. Now the object of getting this perfectly flat right now is so that when we put the first coat of whatever our colored paint is, it'll look 100 times better than it does in silver, that's for sure. So this silver actually shows you mistakes that you'll never see in the finished product, but you will see when you start to buff out. When you buff out and this finish becomes shiny, you'll see every little imperfection, every brush hair, every little ding in it. So right now this is just letting us see ahead of time what we're going to see when we actually have a buffed out finished airplane. If you religiously stick to doing all the flats with a block, you're going to be surprised how easy it is to buff out. It'll buff out 100 times easier than if you just do this by hand. Now what I always do is I block sand as much as I can. Then I'll finish up the final thing with my fingertips. And what that does, it gets in any of the valleys and just roughens it up enough that the next coat of paint will stick. And we'll obviously put more silver on this. This is only going to be, I'm guessing we're going to need 2 more coats of silver, each one sanded out from the looks of this. This is still kind of dry. Okay, we're going to do the cowling and then start on the body. Really needs more than the wing. The wing is almost finished, but you still see there are a few dry spots. You'll notice when you sand in silver, if you let it dry at least 2 days, it'll dust off relatively easy. It'll leave the low spots and the high spots. If you see it balling up on a paper, you're probably going to have to let it dry another day, especially if you put it on very thick, or if you use penetrating thinners. If you use regular 3608S thinner, this will probably be dry in 1 day. But you can see how it brings out all the high spots, all the low spots, and that's the object of painting it silver. We got high spots in the corner here, high spots up here. It's going to eventually get rid of every one of them. We'll just... One of the things that'll help you save the sandpaper is every few minutes dust off the area that you're sanding. Get that silver aluminum dust off. That's what clogs up the sandpaper. That'll help you save some sandpaper. And the idea is to get almost all of the silver off. Almost all of it. And knowing exactly when you have the right amount off, you just have to do a few and sand through and not sand through. You obviously don't want to leave all the silver on there, because you're going to only want to leave the last coat on there. So we're actually using this silver as filler. So we just want to leave just in the little gaps and grain and around the nose ring here, things like that. Now what I do after every coat, another important thing, if you really want to go for some real artwork, is get all the edges. Everywhere there's an edge with a block. This way you get a complete nice radius on all the edges. Very important too in the final analysis, because that's where the paint's going to wear out. It's right on corners and edges. Get in all the little holes. Now because we have all the little holes lined with copper, as soon as we sand into the copper tubing, we know we've got that area pretty well flat. When you're doing this kind of a radius here, always go side to side, finalize it, and this way you'll pick out all the high spots on that. You'll pick out the high spots around here. And you'll pick up a technique right away for how much of that silver should come off. I'd say 80–90% of it should come off. Finish it up by hand. You're going to throw a lot of this sandpaper away. I usually start an airplane with 100 sheets of 320, and I don't have a lot left over when I'm finished. It's part of the price. If you buy sandpaper in a body shop and 100 sheets in a, they call it a sleeve, it'll be a third the price it is in a hardware store. You'll get a lot more for your money. Alright, we're going to finish this up now and then start on the body. Now what I'll do for sure, because I've sanded a lot of this silver off on these parts, I'm going to give this a coat of clear, let it dry, say 4 or 5 hours, and then shoot on another coat of silver. The clear will just help seal this up a lot faster than the silver will. Silver will just add a little weight that we don't need. Now obviously you could do this with just plain filler, you could do this with clear, but the silver really lets you see, really lets you turn your work into artwork. It really picks out every little mistake. It doesn't let you fool anybody. And when you put the final coat of paint on, it looks so much better than it did when it was in silver that you feel good. You go, you know, you leave the workshop that night thinking, wow, you really got something here. Where when you do it the other way, you spray on the colored paint and it usually looks worse than it did in filler, and you go home sick. But this is really, even though this takes a lot of time, in a final analysis, this is the most cost-effective way of getting a really good finish on an airplane, a real front row finish. Okay, that's about ready. I'm even going to do the inside. No sense doing that on video. I'll get the inside done too. And we started working up the fuselage. And of course all the little bad spots, the brush marks that I showed on an earlier video are all popping right through. We're starting to go through some real sandpaper here. Of course, getting down in the fillet, it's a good idea, first of all, to have a nice little fillet tool. I think I showed that on the video earlier. I didn't find it here. And get down into the fillets constantly, and you'll see that come right up. Now, you had a lot of bad spots on this one fillet here for some reason. I don't know how that slipped by me. But that's what the silver is supposed to do. The silver is supposed to show you the bad spots that your hand and your iron is going to miss. Now, if you keep switching the paper, the idea of this tool is keep switching the paper around, because the paper is going to wear right out with silver, even if you let it dry 2 days. Move it. Keep getting in by those fillets. And when you think you got them all, then you can switch to a soft block and get down in the fillet with the soft block. And you'll see, because the silver will stay in the valleys, all your little errors will show right up here. And right now you can just keep putting 3 or 4 more coats of silver on if you have to. If you see the errors are really bad and you got a lot of dry spots, then you go with a coat of clear and silver, clear and silver, clear and silver. When you get up toward the end and you're real happy with the way the finish is coming out and it's real smooth to the touch, then you can just shoot coats of silver. Now, because I have this little canopy on here, I have to get the radius around the canopy real even too. And then of course you want to come in on the wing root this way, always working toward the fillet, and that fillet will blend right in. And when you go to appearance judging, the really top planes are only going to have, there's only so many little details you can do, and one of them is the fillets. You can have exceptionally nice fillets, you can have nice trim, you can have nice cowl lines, ink lines, all of the above, none of the above. But a really top-notch concourse winning plane is going to have a lot of them. May not have them all, but it's going to have a lot of them. People are down there looking at your plane. Any little flaw is going to show up. Once you buff this out, any little mistake you let go at this point in the game is going to jump right out at you. Now what I'll do is I'm going to finish this sanding. Will probably take the rest of the afternoon. I'm going to finish this sanding out, and then maybe we'll, if it's a nice day out, it was nice this morning when I looked. We'll try to get some footage outside, shooting the clear and silver on this. Overcoat it. Again, you gotta just be fussy, 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 fussy. Now we have the body finished now. And what I'm doing on the wing is I'm just scuffing up the silver so I can get a real thin final coat on the wing. There's still a lot of little bad spots on here that I'm not happy with. Body is usually the hardest part. That's what takes, I'm guessing about 60% of the time you spend finishing, you spend doing all the little nooks and crannies on the body. The wing is kind of big and flat. You can just kind of dust off some of this silver. It'll pick up any high spots we still have here too. When you're working with candy apple, it has to be almost perfect. Every little mistake will come through. Alright, we got to do the wing, finish up the little detail areas around the cockpit and stuff, and we'll be ready to go shoot. Now we got almost everything sanded out now. We're going to set up to do the spraying of silver. And we'll put a coat of clear on the body and then a coat of silver on the whole airplane. That'll be the next step. Believe it or not, we got such a nice day out here. It's in the middle of November. We got this nice day. I wanted to rush through and get some of this finish sprayed on. I'm putting a coat of clear on the fuselage, but I won't put it on the wing. And I'm going to shoot silver on the wing. Just an ordinary coat of clear going on the body right now. Spraying with about 30 pounds of pressure, 50-50 thinner and clear. I'd be a little bit of an acrobat here. I got nobody to help me. We never have anybody to help me. Alright, we're going to spray the top, let that dry, and then put a coat of silver on it. dry in 5 minutes now. I spray everything right up to the nose, then I lay the plane on the ground, shoot the nose. Again, we're still shooting clear on this. The reason we don't have the gear doors on yet, the little fairings that go on the landing gear wires, is I want to get the area underneath them sanded perfectly and just about ready to put colored paint on before I go and make them gear doors. Then I'll just finish the gear doors separately. I will let that dry for, I guess, around a half an hour and then go shoot some silver. Now this coat of silver we want to put on obviously as thin as possible. I got the pressure cut down to about 20 pounds. A very thin mixture of silver here. This is really thin. All we want to do is pick up the flaws again. That's all the purpose of the silver is. We'll probably sand most of it off. Most of it off. This does not really look too bad. We got bad spots in the exhaust openings here. Got one bad spot right there. Other than that, it does not look too bad. finish the rest of the silver up off camera. But we're gonna get to the end and flip it over, and we should be done with the silver today. Now we get the whole nobler actually in silver. When this dries up, we can look around for little flaws. Maybe there'll be some little touch-ups on it somewhere. We have to put the landing gear fairings on. We'll be ready to start masking off the trim. Now, I usually do the trim before the actual paint, so the first thing we'll have to do is make up some patterns for the trim. I'll start making them up while this last coat of silver is drying. Now today, while the silver is drying up for a second day, there's still some dry spots on here I'm going to have to correct. I'm going to make up the landing gear fairings. I'll show the technique for making them up. First I want to get all the paint off the wire so I get a nice cool soldering joint, nice clean joint. And I'm going to start the trim. Now keep in mind, we can do the trim. There's no problem doing the trim, and while we're doing the trim, as long as where we're going to put the trim, as long as inside of it the silver is perfect, well, that's okay. We can still be doing little touch-ups on the outside. So this buys us some time. Rather than having to put the plane away for 2 days and let the silver dry, we can be doing the trim, which is usually a pretty time-consuming thing. Doing the trim first allows you to have single paint in a lot of areas that normally you'd have double paint in. You want to get these landing gear wires good and rough too, so the glue has a good chance of sticking. You want to get all the paint off. Paint won't hold them worth a darn. The reason we've done the fairings last is so all this area underneath where the gear will go will be a perfect fit now. We can get a real nice fit in there. A lot of people like to do the gear fairings while they're doing the silver, but we're going to have another 2 or 3 days of touching up silver and doing trim and putting little lines, little detail work into the plane. And right up to the point where we spray the red, we can be touching up little spots. Now there's a couple little pinholes here and here, a couple little dry areas along the trailing edge of the flap where I double silk spanned it. When you see a little dry area, what I call a dry area, what you do now, when the day is finished, I like to do it at the end of the work day, just shoot a coat of clear over those dry areas, let it dry about 5 minutes, and shoot another coat of silver, and in the morning they'll probably go away. I already have the paint in the gun, so that's ready to go. But we'll do that at the end of the day. Then we won't be worried about touching those areas or banging into them or anything like that. At the end of the day, we'll hit all the dry areas with clear and another coat of silver. Okay, we're going to set this up now to make the gear fairings. What I'm doing is roughening up the landing gear leg with some little notches so that our fairing will get a good grip on it. Instead of having a round surface, it'll have some roughness to adhere to. Another way to do this is to solder a little tab onto the wire. I'd rather do it this way. I think it's a little lighter. A little more effective. I got my little template I made up for the landing gear fairings, so that I get 4 the same. I'm going to cut 4 of them out of 1/8" hard ball. So this is pretty hard balsa, pretty stiff too. And then I'm going to put an airfoil shape in them after I notch it and glue that to the wire. Now we made up our little fairing doors. And we got to get a little notch in them. So what I do is mark it off with a little ruler. Take a little piece of 80 grit sandpaper and put it around an 1/8" plywood. And it'll just about make the perfect half moon notch in there. And you can give it a couple test fits onto the gear. You don't want to go all the way through, of course. You can route out a nice 1/8" notch. Yeah, just about right. Okay. And we got to do that to all 4 of them before we sandwich them together. Now obviously you want to try to get these lined up. You don't want to turn them into rudders or anything. You want to try to get them relatively straight to the airflow. Okay, apparently that's pretty solid. Now what we're doing, we're just putting a little airfoil shape into these. Cut down on some of the parasitic drag. You can thin them out a little bit so. Of course we want to round off all the edges. I don't want any razor sharp edges on this. I got a little piece of 1/16 plywood and I'm holding it with a piece of 320 paper here. Just want to round this off. First you sight them from front and back, make sure they're straight. If they're not, you can break them and re-hot stuff them. You don't want to turn these things into little rudders. And I'll flip it over and airfoil the front shape. Again, I'll check that they're parallel and even. Now you got to get some clearance between the bottom block and these fairings, or else they're gonna, the first time you have a rough landing, they'll crush into the bottom block. So what I'm doing is doubling up a piece of 320 and getting about 5/1000 clearance between them so they don't get all gouged up. Get a nice clearance line in there. Now that's one of the reasons we finished the bottom block off before we put these on, so we could get a nice fit in there. Okay, then we're going to true this up. Get a nice radius on these edges. Now the hot stuff on the joint makes for a nice solid edge. Should help it last a little bit too. Then we also have to check the wheel clearance on here. We want a nice tight wheel clearance fit. I'm just doing some final sanding. I'm going to hit this with a couple coats of clear and hopefully get it tissued today if the stuff dries up good. Again, you got to get a little clearance around the block there, or else you're going to be, this is going to crush up into the block on the first hard landing. And needless to say, in this area of the country, you're flying grass more than tar. One of the nice things about this type of landing gear setup is you'll never rip it out of the wing, no matter how bad your landings are. Okay, we got all the clearances accurate. Now we're just going to put a couple coats of dope on this before we tissue it. While it's drying up, I'm going to touch up some of the other bad spots on here in the silver. I'll do that off camera. Now I'm block sanding out this coat of silver, and you can see there's still a few flaws in here. There's still a few low spots that'll show through as shiny silver. So we're going to work these out. I'm waiting for my gear fairings to dry. I'm going to block sand out every little bit of this silver and put another coat of silver on here. Now the bad spots will show up as little high spots. The spots that stay silver, you know they're low. So if you're real meticulous and you get real fussy, and it's that extra couple of days that you'll put into the plane that'll make it a winner instead of an also-ran. Get out every one of those little flaws. We're up to silk spanning the fairings now. While we were off camera, I sanded down the whole cowling and got another coat of silver on there. That'll just about finish up the cowling. It'll be ready for red. I want to finish up the fairings. I'm going to obviously silk span them. I've got 3 coats of dope on here now, sanded down with 320 a little bit. Put the tissue on here, a couple more coats of dope and filler. We'll put some silver on these fairings too. And while this dope is drying up, I'm going to look around the main airframe here for some dry spots to sand. Try to touch up any more little dings I have. I have a couple of dings around by the landing gear fairings here. Well, we're into sanding out this coat of silver. Picking out the little flaws in it. And we're getting most of them out. Now the trick is to sand most of the silver off. Don't leave a lot of it on there, or you build up too much weight. You have to try to sand 80–90% of it off. As soon as you see a nice aluminum airplane coming out of this, you're pretty much done. And you know from that point on you're going to have a perfect airplane. You're not going to paint this white or blue. And uh-oh, better call Mako. You'll see little stuff. If you don't see it in silver, you won't see it, period. End of discussion. And what I try to do is I get my fillets real accurate at this time, because once I'm done with this, once I get what will amount to be the last coat of silver on here, that's it, I'm out of here. I'm going to start masking off the trim. Depending on how long this takes. I've been on this for about 4 hours now. If I can get this done today, I'll start making up the trim patterns. But I don't want to get rushy on this. Right now I'm getting itchy to finish this up. I want to see how it's going to look. It's been a long time since I had an oval, and I'm really looking forward to flying this guy. Again, just fussy, 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 and keep going back over it. Now we're just finishing up the bottom of the wing. I think we'll just have time to spray this today before this session ends. And we'll try to get this another coat of silver on this whole guy today. Now today I came down waiting to see how the silver would dry up. Looks like the silver dried up real nice. May be able to finish this off with one coat today, and that'll be the end of it. Little spots that I've painted. The tip weight box is finished and ready for red. Alright. I'm going to go look at the airplane itself. Go in here and take a look at. Looks like everything dried up pretty nice. Well, I guess we'll be ready. There's a few little spots. The landing gear fairings have to be touched up. The little landing gear fairings look like they need a second coat. There's a few little spots on the body that looks like they could use a second coat. Now I'll go around and touch this up off camera. There's going to be, I'm just guessing, a couple hours, a little touch up here before we start making trim patterns. And we're going to start making trim patterns, I hope. Now one of the real nice tricks for doing candy apple is when you think you're down to the last coat of silver and you got very, very few flaws left in the silver, the last thing I like to do is take a 3M sanding sponge. This is a red sanding sponge. Okay, and what this does, it burnishes off the silver. It just takes off all the little high spots, it dulls it out. It doesn't have a tendency to go through on silk span curves. Okay, now the purpose of this is just to get a totally flat, smooth, almost like a buffed out finish on the silver. And then what I'm going to do is take the last coat of silver and thin it even more. I've been about at 2/3 thinner and 1/3 silver. I'm going to put on a real super thin coat of silver. That'll just give this a nice gloss. And it's that gloss that's going to come through the candy apple. If you're just going to paint the airplane white or green or something, you really don't, you can skip this step. But these sanding sponges are really handy. They don't wear out too often. You can buy them in a body shop. They're made by 3M. They're good for burnishing up spinners and aluminum and stuff too. Now what I'm doing, I'm at the point now where I'm about at the last coat of, I'm hoping this is going to be the last coat. We'll find out. I'm trying to be as fussy as possible on this Nobler, as I've said over and over again. But again, I'm going to try to burnish this coat off and put on a real thin coat of silver. I'm trying not to sand down through into any of the cap strips and things. This has a real nice feel now, a real silky feel after the burnish job. And then what I'm going to do is get ready this afternoon. It's a real nice day out there. Try to get some of this spraying done outdoors. Spraying inside the house here is really for the birds. And we got the Nobler pretty well all burnished down, cleaned up, ready for the last coat of silver. I've tried not to go through in too many spots, obviously, and we just want to thin out the silver now and put just the thinnest coat possible of silver on here, just to make the airplane silver. And this took about 3 hours to burnish this all off. 400 paper and that sanding sponge. And we're going to try to thin out that silver and just put the minimum amount of paint on right now. Have you noticed the way I'm going up and down the cap strip? Put an extra coat on the places that you're more than likely to sand through or buff through. Keeps the weight off the tissue itself. Nice little trick, similar to what we did with the striping stuff. This is a really thin coat of silver. There's hardly any paint in this mix. Probably 3/4 thinner. Just wetting this down with the least little bit of silver I can get on here, so that the candy apple will have something to reflect off of. used up almost all, so. Now this last coat of silver looks like it's dried up real nice. I don't see any giant mistakes in here that we'd want to correct before we can start the trim. Alright, I guess today we'll start doing a trim. Now, one of the things that I do before I put the trim on, and it's a good idea, is to make up patterns and try to see how other trim patterns would look on this. Has different shapes, whatever the shape, unless you're going to just paint the leading edge or something that's pretty redundant with something that somebody else has done. Now, I have a design that I used on last year's plane that I liked a lot. It won the Concourse Award, so I don't see any reason to change that. And I'm going to make up a cardboard pattern in this scale. Of course, that was for a much larger wing. Make up a pattern. I'm going to do that on camera out of cardboard. Now, if I really wanted to, I could make the trim pattern out of, if you're going to paint the airplane first, you could make that pattern out of, say, the color that your trim is going to be, and you could move it around and kind of shift it around and see if white looked better than black, silver looked better than green. You could also buy, one thing I used to do is I used to have the colored paper that they sell to school kids, and that used to be real nice for making up little stars and stripes and triangles and things that you'd want to have in a trim scheme. But for my purposes, I know what the trim scheme will look like. Hopefully it'll look pretty much like last year's Pattern Master. So I'm going to just start cutting out my designs out of paper and then laying them out with tape. Now this is fine line tape, sold by 3M. It's a light green color. Anybody that has never used this probably will have good luck with it. You can buy this in any body shop supply where they sell body shop supplies, paint. That's about all we're going to need, and some paper. Now, I don't have any big sheets of paper. I used to get them from work, but since I'm not working, it's a lot harder to get them. So what I'm going to use is some old IBM cards to make up the trim. I have one of the cardboard. I made this out of IBM cards, not too fancy. This is just a preliminary outline of the trim that I'm going to use. And now what I can do is say, well, gee, does it look better that way, this way, that way? Maybe it'll look better like so. You can have a lot of opportunity to see how it would look ahead of time. In this case, since I've done 3 planes with this trim scheme already, I pretty much know what I'm getting myself in for here as far as the work goes. And I know I want it to be parallel to the leading edge. And I know the trim is going to be white. So I'm pretty much happy with that shape now. Now the only thing left to decide is I want to place it. In other words, I could place it here, 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 anywhere. So I want to make some holes here, and I'll put little pieces of tape that'll hold it down. And I want to make my, what I call my alignment marks, so I know how far from the leading edge this is, how far from the trailing edge. Spot it off there so they come out equally. I don't have one way off in the front and the other one way back like that. Now, one of the things I've done, I cut little holes in the pattern so I can glue this on with a piece of tape temporarily. And I've made a line down here, and I've put the line on both sides. And I'm going to line that line up with the leading edge sheeting. So that allows me to get the top and bottom equal and both sides equal. Now I only have to get an amount that I'm going to have this from the fillet of the airplane here. And I think I'll put that up. Let me measure that off right now. One thing's real handy are these French curves for making up the curves. A ruler for all the straight lines, of course. And I'll set this in at 1/2 inch. Now what I do, I make notes right on a template. Right on a template, I'll write how far from the fuse it is. And this way, when I go to do the other plane, or where it really comes in handy, if I have to touch up, if the plane has an accident or needs to be touched up, I can duplicate it perfect, and I save these patterns. Now, should I ever build another Nobler, of course, I would not have to do this work. I'd already have these templates already made up. So it's a little bit of a time saver, too. Now, you can pretty much see that I use this piece of tape to get this distance from the fuse. I already have the tape on the other side. so they should be relatively equal. I've got my little windows in here that are spotting the leading edge sheeting. And the other little windows that I made in the trim, I've got a little piece of tape holding that so that can't move around now. So now that's pretty much where I'm going to be happy with. I'm going to leave that there. And I'm going to get out my, now for this airplane I'm using 16th fine line trim tape. This tape comes in all different sizes, 8th, 16th. You could be real creative with this. Really nice stuff to work with. And what I'm going to do is just make the outline of the trim. And you can do that. Now usually the first couple times you use this you're going to have a problem. Because they usually cut this, when they cut the end off, they cut 3 or 4 layers into the tape. So you may as well not be disappointed knowing that that's coming. And sometimes you get a bad roll. This one looks like it's cut in pretty far. Okay. But that happens all the time. That's not something new you should be concerned with. Alright, so what I want to do is I want to outline that whole piece of trim with 16th tape. That's going to lay out my primary trim on the airplane. Now what I'll obviously do is duplicate it onto the tail in a smaller size and onto the side of the fuse with the same design. Now this works out real good if you're doing some kind of stars, some kind of real fancy thing where you can move it around as you're working with it. Alright, now I'm just going to go around the whole thing and then we'll get on to the next step. Now obviously you have to be real careful how hard you push down on the silt span part of the trim. When you're doing a foam wing plane it's a lot easier. You pull out your little pattern. And there you have the pattern and there you have the trim laid out on the wing. Pretty symmetrically. And of course, no matter what shape you use, you can go back over and over and over until you're ready to say that's what I want right there. And what I do, I put several layers of tape to make this little angle out at the tip. I want to have the tip fade in like that, like it's three-dimensional. I did that on all the other trim jobs. I thought it looked nice. But I just laid one layer of tape right on the other. I've got 4 layers here until it comes out to be the shape that I want. Obviously 3 would be less of a point, 2 would be even less, and you could put 8 or 10. And this way you'd get all the curves just right. So now the next step is going to be to lay the trim out on all the plane. Then I'll probably wind up putting on a coat of clear around the tape, pressing the tape down, and then I'm going to have to mask off the outside to spray the trim. Well, we got the top of the wing done. Now what I want to do, just to save a little time, I have a little striping brush, very thin long hairs, not a regular paintbrush, and I have some clear dope. I'm going to seal the inside of this tape line. Now a lot of people like to do this with an airbrush. I like to do this with a brush because the dope is thicker. It doesn't melt the tape as easy. And just put a little line right on the inside of the tape. That'll help seal it up. Don't have to be too thick. The least little bit will seal the tape up. And you'll get a nice clean tape line. Now if a little bit of the clear bleeds under, it's not the end of the world, like if red or white or another color bleeds under. Alright, so what I'm going to do is go around these 2 panels before I do the rest of the trim. Then these can be drying and I can mask that off. Now what I'm doing, I'm setting up some masking paper for the airplane. I've got all the fine line tape laid out. Nice thin coat of clear. Now the idea of doing this is to leave the minimum amount of tape showing Just enough to get a nice bind onto the paper, but not to leave enough. Obviously, you don't want to leave so much that you're sticking the paper down. I like to do 3 sheets at a time on a 35 ship. That gives us about 1 panel. I'll be doing the wing first. These are the cheap paper towels. Now you can save a little money by just using the cheap ones here. We're just going to use these for masking purposes. And the cheap masking tape seems to be best. I notice I press the tape down and then pull it off. And this way I've got a little bit of the stickiness removed. I don't have that where it's going to pull a paint off when I go to take the tape off. If you're pulling paint off, when you pick up the tape and big chunks of paint are coming up, it probably means you didn't have enough thinner in the paint, you didn't let the paint dry enough between coats, or you have tape that's really super sticky. Now, this brand of tape is tuck tape, but there's just literally hundreds of kinds of masking tapes. And if you press it down once and pull it up, it'll be just about perfect the second time. Now this doesn't have to be pressed down all that hard. You don't have to shove your fingernail down through it. When you only need 2 sheets like we do here, just all you have to do is tear the paper. And you'll see you can mask out most of the trim. Now I like to do the trim first. It's just personal preference. Then I don't have double paint where the trim is. And this airplane is going to be red and white. You have a real special problem when you try to put white over red. The red never stops coming through. So I think you can, anybody that's looking at this video can get the basic idea of what I'm doing here. I'll do most of 1 wing panel on this video. Paper towels. Newspaper is a good second choice if you don't have access to paper towels. What hangs out over the wing you can just rip right off. I want to fill in some of these little gouges here, little gaps that we have. Always stick the tape to something first and then put it on the airplane. Don't put fresh tape right down. If you're wearing an old shirt, an old flannel shirt is good. It picks up just enough of the fuzz off it that it doesn't let the tape be too sticky. Now some paper towels, when you use towels, will have these perforation lines. I like to cover some of them up. Not really super important, but that'll make for a little bit better job. And what I'll do, I'll go ahead and just mask off as much of the plane as I possibly can. And then we'll get into spraying. I'm hoping it's not raining out there today. I'm hoping we're going to get 1 coat of white sprayed today. Yeah, we're just about finished masking this guy off. I'll mix up the white trim paint. Now one of the ideas of doing this is to get the stuff on and get the tape off as soon as possible. Don't leave it on overnight. Don't leave it on for any extended period of time. Less chance you'll pull up the finish or make an ugly spot on the finish if you get this over with. Mask it off, paint it, and get the tape right off. 1, 2, 3. Alright, I think that's ready to paint. Mix up the paint. Okay, we're spraying the white trim on now. Anybody that's ever sprayed white dope knows that it doesn't cover too well. Now what you can do if you want to be a perfectionist is go down to a local body supply place and get yourself a can of raw pigment that goes in white acrylic lacquer. This looks like white jello, and you can add 2 ounces of that to 16 ounces of SIG dope. And you'll have something that'll cover real good in one coat over silver. Save you a little bit of weight, you won't need as much material on the airplane, and it'll be a lot whiter white than the white that comes from SIG. This is covering relatively good. I've got the extra pigment mixed into the white. Usually 1 coat will do it. This will definitely do it in 1 coat. Regular raw pigment that comes with acrylic lacquer. Body shops mix paint, they don't stock it. Big ones do in this area anyway. And you can buy that pigment, it's real cheap, it's not even expensive. Stinks real bad too. You'll have the smell in your house for a couple of days when you spray it. Looks like we've got a good mix. 1 coat is covering real good. A lot of times white doesn't want to cover real good. I'm trying to get this tape off while the paint is still a little bit on the wet side. I don't want to leave this tape on here any longer than I have to. Of course, it's best to take your time and be careful not to pull up the paint. This white looked like it was a super job. It covered in 1 coat. I give it about 10 minutes to dry and then I go right in and pull the tape off. Then I'll let this dry overnight, and tomorrow I'll pull any little hairs of white that are hanging out over the edge of the other tape. I'll just cut them right off with a fresh razor, X-Acto cleaner. Alright, we're going to pull the rest of the tape off now. Alright, we've got all the tape off the airplane. Now we'll let this dry for a while, probably 2 days before we come back and work on this again. Then we're going to mask off the white, spray the red. And we luckily pulled this tape off and didn't have 1 spot where the paint came up, so pretty lucky. Usually you get a couple of little spots where it pops up and you got to touch them up. Okay, now what I'm doing here, I'm masking off the white, just putting strips of masking tape and trimming it out. I've left the thin line tape on. I have this about half done on the top. This has the thin line tape on it. This is covered with masking tape, and then obviously what I'm going to do then is touch up any more spots on the silver and then go right ahead and shoot the red. This operation usually takes maybe an hour or so to mask off the various little trim areas. And now what I buy by doing it this way is I don't have double paint under the trim. Maybe 20% of the airplane is trim, so I don't have double the amount of white to cover the red, and I don't have double the amount of paint underneath the trim. So I save maybe 1/4 of an ounce, maybe 1/2 an ounce if you have a lot of trim on a plane by doing it this way. So I'll finish this masking up off camera, and then we'll shoot the... This is regular candy apple lacquer that was spraying over the Sig Silver. You can buy this in any body shop supply store. Comes in several colors. You have to spray it over a base coat of either silver, gold, or white. It's a very bright color. It shows up good in the sun. It's the color I've used for the last 4 or 5 years to do my pro stunt ships. Spraying with 30 pounds of pressure and about 2/3 thinner, 1/3 candy apple lacquer. We need about 8 ounces of this material to spray a typical noble, maybe 10 to do a big stunt ship. There's a cheap set of photography lights, but this does it lets me look for the bad spots. I see I got one in by the body there. usually get one in by the fillets if you're not careful. Alright, we found that one. Here again, you got to be real fussy. You got to start getting fussy. We didn't miss any on the body. Sides of the body look like they're dry. Oh yeah, we got a couple spots up there. Now I've got all the red sprayed. We're going to let this dry for a couple days. I'll pull off the tape, obviously pull off all the tape in about an hour or so, let the paint dry out. And we can add this to our collection of red candy apple paint jobs. Now I get ready to start pulling off some of this masking tape. Now I like to pull the tape off real slow, 90 degrees straight back. Say a few prayers while you're pulling it back. If you're real lucky and you go to church on Sunday religiously, you don't cheat on your wife, you can get this off in one nice swoop. Now, one of the important things I've found is once you get all the paint on the airplane, before you put the clear on, I like to set it aside a few days and let it dry out. I try to put it by a heating vent. Since I'm usually building in the winter, I like to put it by a heating vent, let it dry out a little bit. A week. Of course, the longer the better. The longer you let it sit, the better off it's going to be. If you go rushing through and slap the clear right on, the paint lines where the tape is, they tend to melt. And you wind up putting a lot more paint on the airplane than you really need to seal everything up. Now I haven't looked at this yet. I've been thinking about painting this stripe in here green to match the other concourse plane, but I haven't decided if I'm going to do it yet. I want to see how this looks in silver. I like to have a minimum of 3 trim colors. This would be the first plane I ever used that only had 2. So I'm going to look at it, see if I can fancy it up a little bit. Now Mike Rogers taught me a good trick. In fact, Mike's coming over for dinner later today to look at his plane. Taking one of these guys to knock down paint lines. Now the day after you do it, those paint lines are hard and you can usually razor them right off with one of these cards. Richie Towie uses a credit card. That's a great idea. That works good if you have, especially if you have a new one. The plastic's nice and hard. This will usually give you real nice paint lines. Now if I decide to paint this stripe in here green, I'm going to have to reverse mask it and I'll do it with a brush. I don't know if I'm going to do it yet or not. I want to see how it looks in silver when the whole plane is put together. And that usually will get you pretty clean. If you're ever using silver or gold, Whatever you do, don't hit this with sandpaper. You'll put scratches in the silver. In fact, if you're using a real brand new credit card, you can scratch the silver and you won't be able to get the scratches out. Usually this, if you go at a 45-degree angle, you can knock them edges right off. Takes a little bit of time, but they'll come right off, and it's a lot more reliable than using sandpaper. Alright, so we'll go ahead and take all the tape off the plane, knock it all down, and then we'll be ready to decide on what we're going to do with that silver stripe.
If you film it, put it up. You come to our dinner there.
Who's the Garden State Circle Burner thing?
Yeah,
You think I want to be the raisin in the rice pudding? What are you?
Hey, you're on video. Don't start no racial talk.
Well,
We're over at, yeah, pick it up, Joe. We're over at Big Jim's house. We got it assembled, weighed, and we're doing some bench trimming on it here. Hold it up.
This is incredible.
Hold it up. It came out 33 ounces when it was done.
This is your car.
Balance is a little on the
I
nose
thought you
heavy
had a
side.
little car.
It's Joe Ortiz on the photo there.
Oh.
We still got some buffing to do. We're going to put that on a video later.
2500?
I borrowed this camera for today. That's it, Joe. Let's see how
This is the one
shiny that
you keep
is.
modifying? Oh, you better stop.
Just keep doing what you're doing. That's good, Joe. We assembled it and weighed it. Did some preliminary bench trimming on it. Looks like it's going to be a real good flying plane.
What diet?
Still got the buffing on the bottom to do. Most of the body's done.
You gotta exercise it.
Got the big banner wheel, banner type wheels, not really banner wheels.
That's the way it comes on diets.
Yeah, I'm zooming in on a cowl now, Joe. That's good. Hold it just the way it is. Okay, good. Jim thinks we're going to have to cut some more holes in the nose, let a little more air in here. And we're also thinking that 35 is going to be too powerful for this. We're going to try a Fox 25 in it because it's so light. Yeah, let me get super close on that camera. This is the first time we had it out in a light like this. The first time I seen it out in a light like this.
That ain't bad.
Just hold it right where it is, Joe. Probably mail some of this down to Gieske.
Yeah. I take B-mix.
Probably get run over here standing in front of Jim's house. Now, one of the reasons we came over here today, we took some pictures for the magazine. Took some pictures for Stunt News. Joe's a professional photographer, so he did the pictures. And we did some preliminary trimming on this. Number one, we checked the tip weight. Number two, we checked the balance point, which is real nose heavy. I'd rather be nose heavy than tail heavy. We're going to look for a Froome spinner, an 1.75 inch spinner. We got one of those cast spinners on there. That's really heavy. But so far, I'm real happy with it. We had it down to the Circle Burner Club meeting Friday night, and it was a real popular attraction. Everybody was pulling it and putting dings in it and dropping pens on the wing. So, Fox 35 event is less than a month away. We're looking for at least to get a couple flights on it before we actually go fly it at a contest. I got two scales. On one it's 33 and the other scale is 33 and a half, so it's probably really 34.
Gieske, eat your heart out.
That includes the engine, right?
Eat your heart out.
Get ready. Put some tobacco in that pipe, Gieske. We're coming to get you.
Oil the wheels.
But the problem, as always, is we really want to find out if the national level judges are going to really accept the smaller plane, or if they're going to want to go with the bigger model, the faster models. And we'll find that out. It might be real interesting. Maybe a real interesting year anyway.
That's a real beauty.
I like it. Jim Silhavy,
That's a real beauty.
come back.
I hate airplanes like this. I can't holler at Wendy.
Are we gonna tell Gieske about the secret for the motors or not?
Nah.
Nah.
A new secret, we put a 49, Fox 59 piston in a 35 inches.
Wait till the next one. Wait till the next plane. Oh, it's gorgeous. Cardinal is gorgeous.
The car.
So the rest of this video, presumably this will be the last video. One of the things we're going to do, we're going to try to do some of the bench trimming. We're going to show some of the more of the buffing, some of the actual ways of checking the vertical CG, which we haven't done yet. We put a little extra tip weight in there too, just to make sure. We got a set of Johnson core cables, the old copper-coated lines, and we got to cut them yet. And of course, my fully adjustable handle. We got to fully adjust a couple of handles for this.
Me and Jim.
And like I said, Jim wants to try a Fox 25 in here because it's so light. We're going to do that too. So it's going to be an interesting beginning of the season. I haven't hit the silver polish. Usually I'll wait an extra week before I do the silver polish.
Something is weird.
What? Weird.
What's weird about it? Looks right to me.
Turn the camera off.
Nah! Don't you dare! Don't you dare! That's a Virgin airplane. That's a Virgin. You don't talk about that.
Oh boy, oh boy.
Yeah, they're good. When was the music start?
This is, what's today? February 2nd? This
No,
clear dope's been sitting
31st.
about,
31st.
geez, it's been sitting 6, 7, since December 7th. It's been sitting on the wall with the dope curing, so
But I didn't know the numbers.
it's a good 6 weeks it's been drying.
We were at her Jim's birthday one. Then we told Holly.
Still got to get me that light spinner, get that weight down about 32 ounces. Anybody out there watching that's got an 1 3/4 flume spinner they want to donate to Killer Nobler cause here, just send it right in. Don't send the bill, just send the spinner. We're not too corrupt, are we? It's still cold here, you can't see it, but there's still snow on the ground in various places. We're out in Ozone Park by Jim's house. Hey! Wait a minute. One of the nice things about this Nobler is it fits in my car. Well, none of my other planes fit anywhere near the car in the car. They don't fit. This one fits right in the car. It's real easy to carry around. We're gonna go from here up to Joe's apartment. Today's Super Bowl day, right? Super Bowl! Years from now when you watch this, remember it was Denver versus the Redskins. We didn't know who won yet because the game is at 6 o'clock. So Jim put all his money on Denver. I'm betting John Elway's gonna eat him alive tonight. But this is my baby. We're gonna find. I'll hope we can learn something. This was Jim's idea to build this plane. Let's give Jim his full credit. This was totally his idea to build and get this set up. I wrote a couple little magazine articles for it and about it. We did videos on it, so it's the first plane that we've ever done full videos on. And hopefully some of the people out there learn something about how to build and how to finish and the other little nonsense things that go into how to make a cowling. How to do the trim first paint techniques. Paint buffed out exceptionally easy. I don't know why. Probably because I let it dry the extra 2 or 3 weeks. I had it hanging down by the furnace in my cellar. So we're gonna maybe shoot a little more video by Joe's apartment later. Indoors, maybe you can see it better indoors. This will probably be enough for now. We want to go down in Jim's cellar. He got a flood in his cellar. The sewer backed up. And Gene Schaefer's plane was floating around down there. So I'm gonna try to go rescue it later. All right, we'll probably pick. Well, we're in Joe Ortiz's apartment now. We're going to do some work on a Nobler while we're waiting for the Super Bowl to start. Just do a little pan around here, look at some of the other stuff in his apartment. This is Joe's work table down here. He laid out some paper. We're going to try to do some buffing on it, but I don't know, the Super Bowl's starting. We're probably not going to bother doing anything.
Well, you can put this on this.
Yeah, let's take a look at that crutch while we
Joe,
get
get
the
the
video.
plate.
Put it down on the table.
Paper plate.
Yeah.
This is a Magnum Joe Ortiz is building. Just get a couple feet on the end of this tape. Noble tape's really over now, except for the buffing tape. This is a crutch he's making. It's got kind of a big Jim Greenaway type of nose construction. There's a video showing how to duplicate this kind of construction piece for piece. Tom Morris's ship that he built. And of course he's got the landing gear in the body. Out where we are, it's pretty practical to do it that way. Some holes in the double. Of course the doubles run right to the end of the wing. That's always a good idea. He thickened up the bottom of the wing on this Magnum a little bit. Got all his center lines on here correctly. If you've seen all the beginning Nobler tapes, you'll see how to get those reference lines in straight. Let me show this around here. This is really a good way to make a removable tank and make a nice solid type of nose. Of course this will all get sheeted in. There's got to be outlet holes here. He hasn't done them yet. Let the air out. Definitely always put aluminum pads under the motor, no matter what kind of motor you use. Always a good idea. And another thing too, you can sand and Jap tissue this body all out while it's like this before you even put the wing in. Oh, there's a Nobler that Joe's built a Magnum. Sorry, not a Magnum up there. It's all finished. He's got hanging on his wall. There's the Magnum wing up there. And some All-American plans. Various trophies and stuff that he's got. Anything else in there? You got an All-American body, yeah. Yeah, stick that out there. Old-time stun All-American. Yeah, it's cute. Little plate for landing gear.
Fox 35. Good old
Yeah.
Fox.
Oh yeah, good old Fox, baby.
No cowl on that, Joe?
No, just spinnables on there.
And there's the cup from the Circle Burner meet. Joe won the cup for the Circle Burner meet this year. And we're about an hour away from the Super Bowl now, so just pan around, we're just waiting. We were going to come over here and do some work on this and pan and buff it out with some silver polish, but we're not going to do that today. Just getting too close to Super Bowl time. So what we did, we went out and bought about $25 worth of cold cuts and Chinese soup. We're going to sit here and make a pig out of ourselves. Well, we're back in my shop now. One of the things I'm going to try to make, now I wound up buying a roll of this soft foam because the Nobler is a silk span covered airplane. This is soft packing foam. I'm going to try to make up some mittens for the airplane to put on it, so while it's sitting around and while people are handling it and cats don't walk on the wing and go through the silk span. So that's one of my other little projects I'm going to try to do. I also took the spinner out of this plane and took about 2 hours of Dremel and lightened it up a bit. So we're now under the 33 ounce mark, and hopefully the CG's a little closer. Later on today I'm going to have to take these old Johnson core cables and try to make up a nice set of lines. That's another trick. I also have to bring this other motor to Jim and have him rework that motor, so I'll have a spare. So now we're talking about 3 motors here. Hope that'll be enough to get me through a season. Especially being Jim's talking about a 25 now instead of a 35 because it's so light. But anyway, that's about, oh, I'm just guessing 200 hours of Nobler work that you just looked at on this video. And looking around the shop, I see there's my foam wing. I'm going to have to start my foam wing Nats plane pretty soon. In fact, I probably started today. I'm going to have to return this camera soon, so that'll be the end of this. This is probably going to be really the end of the video for the Nobler. There's been probably 14 hours as far as I can tell. I've got 14 to 15 hours of video. And this is the first, to my knowledge, the first video that's ever been done on any sunship, let alone any airplane at all, that you can watch the whole plane being built. I don't know if the people that actually bought this video, borrowed it, stole it, begged it out. I don't know if they enjoyed it, appreciated it, passed it around, got something out of it, didn't get something out of it, I don't know. But we went from this box, we still have the original kit, to this, and it's a pretty much ready to fly Nobler. Pretty nostalgic in my book. I'm going to try to take this down to the Circle Burner Stunt Forum, which is 2 weeks from now. That'll be a separate videotape, and we're going to discuss all the little tips of building it, the little techniques that went into building it. And we still have the kit. That's the nice part. We haven't destroyed this kit. We haven't in any way hurt the kit that we can't go build another one. We also have several templates, and in the shop, I'll take a walk in the shop and just point out what we still have from building this Nobler. There's been several things, including these bulkheads here that we have for the Nobler, that they're really tracings of the kit parts, the doubler. I think we got the fuse side here. And these are done on, you know, just scrap wood that's too heavy to use for a normal construction. Some more Nobler parts. I think I have a set of ribs. Yeah, I made an extra set of ribs too, just in case. Should I ever build another Nobler like this, one of the things, now having gone back in history and built this Nobler over like I did, having gone back and built it, one of the things I realize now, and it's probably too late to do anything about it, is that it would be a lot easier to build this wing on a jig, on the tubes. And I would have to redraw out the two end templates, of course, and dial them up, put holes in them, etc., and do them on my steel rods like I did my 60 ship. Unfortunately, when I was building that built-up wing, I didn't have access to a camera. And in the weeks around Christmas that I did build it, there was a lot of things going on in the house. I didn't get a real chance to video it. I'll get a couple feet of that airplane on the end of this video, because that's one of the things I'm going to try to do in the near future, is make up a video of building a wing on the tubes. That's such a much easier way of doing it than it is on this anyway. Since this has not been on video, there really isn't a whole lot of putting it on video. What I did with this plane is I pretty much let the dope dry out for about 6 weeks. In that time, I had it sitting by a heating vent where nice hot air, warm air was blowing on it for 6 weeks. It hardens up the dope. And what that does, if you go to buff out a plane, these are the parts for my 60 ship that aren't buffed out yet. If I go to buff them out today, that dope isn't even a week old. If I go to buff that dope out today, I'm in big trouble. I'm just going to sit here and grind off paint and go through, and there's going to be spots where I go through and everything. It's a real pain to try to buff out soft dope. Dope has a way of getting harder with age. So what happens is after a week it's a certain hardness, after 2 weeks it's harder, 3 weeks it's harder, etc. Now, if you're going to try to rush the thing, if you want to buff the plane out a week after you paint it, let's say, one of the neat little tricks you can do is you go get yourself some 1200 sandpaper instead of 600, and that'll allow you to buff it out while it's still soft, but it's a lot more work. You won't scratch it up. When the paint is soft and you hit it with 600 paper, you're going to wind up putting a zillion little scratches in it that really don't come off with time. As time goes by, the scratches are still going to be there. Now, this mess that I can't walk around, I keep banging into it, is a furniture set that I'm refinishing for my in-laws. Anyway, right here I got 4 different kinds of rubbing compound and a towel. And what I do, I get my little dish of water. Right there is the dish of water, in fact, and some 1200 and 600 sandpaper, and figure out if the 600, you do one little spot, if the 600 is scratching it too bad, well, you're in trouble. Then you got to either wait or go to 1200 and pay the price. Now the 1200 is really good if you do the silk span areas with it, because it's hard to get the scratches out. Once you scratch a silk span open bay, it's just awful trying to get the scratches out. You'll be there forever. I try all different kind of rubbing compounds. Each one of them is a little bit different grit. The red is a little rougher than the white. It seems like the DuPont white is about the best. After the plane is all compounded out, you can get some Gorham silver polish. It's a pink paste. That's really a nice finishing touch. That'll do it. You can rub the whole plane out with that too, but it just seems like it's easier to do the original rubbing out with the white. I don't have the tripod for the camera here, or I do one little panel. It wouldn't really do any good. Anybody that's up to the point where they're going to buff pretty much knows how to buff out a plane, or has some rough ideas how to do it. You need a tripod for the camera if you're going to show anything like that. Some other little things that apparently worked out with this plane because this plane came out so light and because I used all really good wood on it. And I was real careful with the finish. Any plane that tends to be light will always tend to be nose heavy, and this one is no exception. Yesterday we were over at Jim's house and he was checking out the center of gravity, getting a rough idea where it is, and it's way too far forward. So we either have a choice now of maybe adding some tail weight or obviously grinding some more out of the spinner, which is going to be a lot of work. Or getting a froom spinner, one of those spun spinners. That'll be another choice. It's still pretty cold outside. We just can't go outside and cut lines yet. It's just impractical to do it. I'll wait until a warmer day comes. I'm going to cut the lines and get a handle set for it. When a plane is in this stage too, one of the things you might want to do, and I do it all the time, is at the end of a building day, I'll have a half hour or so to spare, is I'll just take it down and get my can of compound out and look around for some spots that I missed. And even though you don't see them right away, you'll see them eventually. You play around long enough, you're going to find little spots around the canopy and around the cowling that you missed. Little spots where maybe you went through on a silk span. You can always take a little brush and paint and just touch up with a little bit of red paint. Candy apple, believe it or not, touches up pretty decent. And you can just go back and scrub that spot down a couple days later and get it to where you almost can't see it. So, keeping a plane nice now, of course, is an ongoing thing. You fly this 10 times, you take it home, there's a couple little dings or scratches if you patch them right up. That's one of the things Ski Dombrowski does, is he takes his plane at the end of a flying session and goes over it with really with a fine-tooth comb, touches up any scratches, makes sure everything is, nobody's put a ring mark in the plane or anything. And what that lets him do is at the end of 3 years, he's got a plane that looks like a Concourse winner instead of some of the things maybe that, even my planes after 3 years, they look like somebody threw them off the Empire State Building. So that might be a good trick. I always leave a little fuel in a tank and leave the tank capped up anytime the plane's in storage. Maybe during the flying season that's a little bit of overkill, but over the winter you sure want to do that. It's sure a good idea to put some after-run oil in the airplane. In the motor, flip the motor a few times, keep that liner from getting rusted up. Or if you have a ring motor, keep the ring from getting gummied up. Trying to think of other little tips that might be handy. Those little foam mittens are a good idea to put over any silk span wing and tail. Good protection. And what I'm going to do in the meantime, a friend of mine, Ron Connors, is supposed to have gotten a couple of, Top Flight doesn't make props anymore, and if my memory is correct, Top Flight 10.6s are the only props that work on Foxes real well. So I'm going to have to try to scap up a bunch more of them and balance them and finish them. Eventually we're going to do a video on balancing and modifying propellers. There's no point in going into any detail on that now. It's going to be a pretty extensive video, and I'll show all the little tips and techniques that I have for making, changing, and modifying props. That's an art all on its own. That would take more probably than a 2-hour video when you get involved in it. We're also going to do a little demo at the Circle Burners on prop modifications and prop balancing and things. And that's a good thing to know even if you're a scale flyer or a whatever kind of, any kind of, or even an RC flyer really, is how to get the most out of that stuff. So, for whatever it's worth, again, I hope the people out there that watch this can benefit by it. I hope we're going to have other people contributing some video footage into this. And certainly I'm not the only one that's got access to a camera. Anybody has access to a camera, get some footage out to Ken Budensink and let him get it in his video magazine, let him get it available to other people. I've already had about 5 other people contribute video to our magazine cause, if that's what you want to call it. Billy Simons gave us some video, Kazi Minato gave us some video, Bobby Hunt gave us some video. We're working on several other people to try to get them to get us some video. There's supposed to be some real good video of the 76 Nats around that the guy in Omaha, Nebraska has, but I don't know if we're going to get that. Bob Gialdini's doing some video for us, I hope. So maybe by the time you actually get to watch this video, we're going to have a lot more available than we do right now, and that'll be neat too. So we're almost at the end of this video. One of the things I want to put on the ass end of this video is a couple feet of my 60 ship, which is sitting up in the living room cooking right now. Okay, we're in my living room right now, and do a little walk around on this guy. This is the built-up wing pattern master that I made while that Nobler, the dope, was drying out, which took about 6 weeks. This plane took me about 6 weeks to make. I've got 2 quarts of light coat on here drying out right now. This is an all built-up airplane. It's all tissue paper. Ribs on everything. I don't know if you can see that in the video. I did a little unusual artwork here up by the canopy. Believe it or not, that was a lot of work to do that. Hard to tell from the picture, I'm sure. But anyway, now the trick is, and this will relate into the Nobler, you can kind of get a feel for what's going on here. This airplane right now is in the drying stage where the Nobler was 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago I had the Nobler at this stage, and it was just sitting up in the living room here by the heating vent. That's the heating vent down there. And I hang it up, and I just let it sit by that heating vent for 6 weeks, and that gets it ready to be buffed out. Of course, if you live in Florida, you can put it out in the driveway, probably to be dry in a week. But up here in the north, where it's damp and cold, pretty much 6 weeks is a good ballpark number for getting something like that dried out. So anyway, make a long story short, this guy is going to dry now for 6 weeks, and while it's drying out, I'm going to be starting a foam wing duplicate plane to this. It'll take me about 6 weeks to get that plane into clear and ready to buff out. And while that one's drying out, I'll buff this one out. Then, when that one's done, I'm hoping the last one, it'll already be the flying season, and I'll just have to wait and buff the other guy out little by little. The last plane of the season always tends to get hurried up into the buff stage. Now, a lot of people, and I'm not saying this is a bad idea, a lot of people fly a plane for a half a season before they decide to buff it out. There's nothing wrong with that. But keep in mind, you do change the CG and you do change the overall weight a small amount when you do that. So the ideal thing, of course, is to have it all buffed out the day you take it to the field and bench trimmed. Bench trimming being setting the CG, the tip weight, etc. Checking everything out before you get to the field. I'm hoping that this guy is going to weigh just under 60 ounces, and it'll probably take me 4 or 5 hours to bench trim it out. And what I do, I go to Greenaway's house, and he has a couple of fixtures and jigs, which I'll get on the next video, for setting the vertical CG, and a couple, not really a high-tech thing, setting the normal CG, but setting the vertical CG is a little bit of a job. It takes a little bit of time setting that. And what you basically have to do is hold the plane by the end of the wing fillet and the front of the wing on the leading edge. Get it dead center, because you'd like the plane to balance right on the center of the wing. And if you go try that on a lot of planes, you'll find out about 99% of them don't even come close to balancing. And then what I do is try to adjust that by putting heavier or lighter wheels, bigger or smaller wheel pants, any combination of changing the hardware to things I can change. This airplane has gear in the wing, so it's going to be a little harder than if you have the aluminum gear up on the body. But it's not impossible. And this plane has a rather nice finish on it right now. This will probably buff out just peachy keen. I did a little experiment on this. What I did is I put on the light coat, 1 coat a day for about 2 weeks. I have about 15 coats of clear on here, real thin clear, rather than blowing on real thick clear, which I've done in the past. There's about 2 quarts of material, but it's thinned out about 3 to 1 as I put it on with the 3608S. And what happened is it looks like it laid down real nice, and it'll make the buffing go real fast. I don't know if you're going to see that in the video, but this plane almost has a shine on it already. And it'll make the buffing go a little bit easier. The Nobler was